Hey, you like cars? Look, once again, back where we belong. CarQuicks podcast. You know what time it is. You know we're driving in. Let me get this cracking appropriately. Episode 67, CarQuicks podcast. How are y'all doing out there? We got a special one. Little, just a little special. Sometimes certain cars come out. I want to just highlight. That's what we got here today. But before, how's everybody doing? How's your friends, your family? Most importantly, to the people that were devastated by the Hurricane Helen. Prayers, condolences to those people, because the news that is coming out from there is just wild. It's unfortunate. It's wild. It's just a crazy time. And those people are working through a lot of that. So if anybody is out there or have friends and family that are affected by that, prayers to you, prayers to your family, and condolences to anything that may have happened, and for things to get better and things to work out as they should. Today, we're going to talk about a very particular car, okay? And if you're new to the CarQuicks podcast, I want you to just, join in, like and subscribe, come into the family, come into the fray, join us. But today, we're talking about something special that is from McLaren. So to just jump right into it, to drive right in, as I say, the W1. Yes. So today, McLaren, as of this recording this morning, it's just Sunday, they announced the successor to the P1, which was the successor to the F1. And this is a massive deal because we don't get the big players in this world, not to say that hypercars do not exist and that they do not come out very regularly. Honestly, I've said that before, that if you have $2 million to spend on a car, you have probably more options than us that say we want a sports car for $40,000. Okay, there are a ton of options if you have money to blow. And so we have the likes of Koenigsegg and Pagani, and I kind of feel like sometimes those guys get kind of put in a very specialized category. They are considered hypercars, or you could say supercars. I mean, those two names kind of go back and forth, right? We all know what they stand for: a supercar, or something beyond a supercar, which is when we get to hypercar. But you have the likes of Pagani, you have the likes of Zenvo, you have the likes of all these companies, right, that make these really crazy cars. You even have in Texas, we have Hennessy Motorsports. They make the Venom F5. And so you have these crazy cars, wild horsepower numbers, and bespoke everything. But the main players are really what we look at to kind of see where certain benchmarks are. Not to say that certain cars aren't faster than some of these major players, because there are plenty of faster cars and even faster on the track times. I mean, recently Mercedes AMG 1 broke the Nürburgring track time again, and it already had broke it the first time. But Porsche, Ferrari, and McLaren are some of the three top players when it comes all together. When we're talking supercars, these names come up. When we're talking motorsports, these names come up. And so back in like 2013, 2014, we had all three of them releasing a car of this caliber. It was the Ferrari LaFerrari, and we had the Porsche 918 Spider, and we had the McLaren P1. That was called the Holy Trinity back then. And everybody who's into cars knows that was a really exciting time, because prior to that, especially for McLaren, the last thing we had was an F1, which was in the early 90s. And Porsche hadn't made anything equivalent to that since like the 2004 to 6 Carrera GT. And Ferrari hadn't been in the limelight for a car of that caliber, like the LaFerrari, since the Enzo. So it was due time for something like that. It had been well over 10 years for some of these cars. And so now we're here again, right? We're here in 2024. It's about another 10 years later. The P1 still looks like the P1. If you see one in the street, if you see one at a car event, it's still a special occasion. You rarely see them. Yes, they can kind of look familiar to 675 LTs and 750s in the Artura. And you can kind of say, well, I can kind of get the look of that with a cheaper McLaren. But the P1, when it pops up, it's a big deal. Even more so than the Senna. And the Senna was, in some areas, some people thought it was like the successor to the P1, but really was like a very track-focused 720. But regardless, the P1 is always special. It will remain special always. And the F1 was essentially the beginning of this specialness when Gordon Murray went around and built a 3-seater supercar of that magnitude in the early 90s. V12 from BMW, gold foil film inside of the engine bay, bespoke titanium gold tool sets, and center lock wheels, and center position and manual transmission. Very, very much analog at a time when, well, there was many analog cars, but to this day considered one of the greatest cars ever made, and the price reflects it because you're going to need like $20-30 million to get one of those. But today we have another letter, W1. I don't know what they're going to do later on. They got a few left, WY. They're going to have to do a couple things. So the W1 gets announced, and to kind of give you what the P1 had, the P1 in 2014 had about 903 horsepower, 664 foot-pounds of torque. It had a twin-turbo V8. It was a hybridized system. I cannot remember if the hybrid system allows you to do anything in electric mode. I want to lean towards it didn't, but if it did, it was negligible. We're talking about 3 to 7 miles on electric. It was basically, if it did that, it was so you can get into your neighborhood without making the neighbors mad because you have this loud car coming down the street at whatever hour of the day or night. But P1 is out. We've already seen a story about it. We've seen the reviews. We've seen plenty of videos. You can go on YouTube and look at it all up. But the W1 today gets announced, and it moves that needle even further up, especially when it comes to power. So what do we got? We have a brand new motor. It's a flat plane crank V8. No, it's not a V12. McLaren has already pretty much put their foot down on what engines make the most sense to them, and it's really, a lot of it is forced induction V6, V8s. So twin turbo V8, 4-liter, flat plane crank, by itself, 916 horsepower, 664 foot-pounds of torque. Sounds familiar? Remember, P1 in 2013 made 903. So you could argue like, little 13 horsepower more, kind of the same. Hold your horses right there. In conjunction with that, it also runs an electric motor. But this electric motor is called a flux radial motor. And one of the interesting things I got to read about this, because I went to go do some research, was that Koenigsegg, it might have been a year ago, they showed off an electric motor in a very small housing that produced a very large amount of power and something extremely compact. They called it the dark matter, and they used it inside of their car, the Gamera. When they were showing off that car, they were like, there is a gas motor. They also had an option that had a 3-cylinder turbo that nobody bought, unfortunately. And they showed off that electric motor, how much power it made to it. And so McLaren is using the same technology. This electric motor, along with a 1.3-liter kilowatt battery, which is somewhere in the chassis, I would imagine somewhere in the middle of the monocoque to reduce the center of gravity, built to have ultra-fast charging and discharging. By itself, this motor, small, compact, 342 horsepower, 324 foot-pounds of torque, additional. So we had 916, 664 foot-pounds of torque. Now we're going to add on 342 and 324. And the grand total is 1,258 horsepower, 998 foot-pounds of torque. Bonkers. Now I get it. We are Corvettes. Corvettes have 1,000 horsepower, okay? Bugatti Tourbillons have 1,800. So I know numbers in the grand scheme of things, the numbers can kind of be a wash, right? Underground Racing just showed off a Revelto that had a twin turbo kit already, and they're talking about 2,000 horsepower. So, I mean, numbers can kind of be like, whatever, numbers ain't that big of a deal. But I'll repeat it again. I've always said, at no point in time will I ever see a number like that and be like, I'll be like, this is still nuts. This is bonkers. 1,258 horsepower in a McLaren W1. So that is over 300. That's about 360 horsepower more than a previous P1. That's a massive difference. And red lines at 9,200 RPM. So we got the sounds of a flat plane crank, the sounds of turbos whooshing, the spooling, and bypass valves and blow-off valves, and all the nice sounds of turbo engines up to 9,200 RPMs. but what does it weigh, right? Because one of the things that happens when you get to these very high, complicated supercars and hypercars that we have now is that weight becomes a thing. And McLaren is probably one of those places where most of their buyers and people that consider them the top of the pile when it comes to supercar makers isn't really going to be feeling a heavy car for the sake of power and speed. If they said, hey, we're making a supercar, weighs 5,000 pounds, but does 0 to 60 in 1.1 seconds, and top speed is 380. I'm like, that's cool, but now we just got a Autobahn missile with nowhere to go. This, however, in dry weight isn't really like a good indication on the true weight because you don't have a driver, which drivers fluctuate. Obviously, I'm heavier than probably the driver they're going to use to crack whatever lap time they're going to have. But the dry weight doesn't include the gas and the fluids that you need for the engine and the motor and a car to operate. So 3,084 pounds dry weight. But significantly here is that that's only 10 pounds heavier than the P1. 10 pounds heavier than a P1 with 360 more horsepower. Trust that 10 pounds, even when you add the fluids, let's say it's 30, let's say it's 50 pounds, let's say it's 100 pounds more. 100 pounds more, and I got an extra 360 horsepower. Hey, nobody's complaining at all. And the power's there. And one of the cool things, too, that I do like that they did on this car is that they kept it rear-wheel drive, which is kind of crazy because most of the supercars and hypercars are trying to find some way to have all-wheel drive or electronic front differential in order to maintain that power so that you don't hit the gas and realize that you need to be a driver, okay? And you need to know what you're doing because the back end is stepping out and it's stepping out quickly. So this has a locking rear diff, no all-wheel drive. So the front end is free of the complications of electronic diffs and half shafts and all those things you got to do to make an all-wheel drive system. Rear-wheel drive, straight to the tires. Don't know the width of the tires, but I can't imagine this isn't anything smaller than a 315 series tire, 325, 355, something massive in order to just handle that much torque hitting the rear wheels and the horsepower this car is generating. And the way it handles that, which we will get to, is a lot to do with the aero of it. But with this setup, with rear-wheel drive, which another key point that I wanted to bring out too that I read on their website is that they still maintain hydraulic steering. Now, it's funny because I read so many car magazines growing up that reading editors and journalists of like Road and Track and Motor Trend, them talking about steering feel was such a thing that when I started driving cars and I had a job when I worked with magazine journalists delivering these cars, I remember just getting in certain cars like an Audi RS4 when they first came to America in like 2007, or when the Evo 8s first showed up into the United States and I was driving those, where Mazda made the brand new Miata back in like 2006. I remember driving these cars and consciously remembering like, I want to know what this feels like steering. Like this was what they talked about. Like if it didn't steer good, the review was like, I mean, it's cool. The steering feels like I'm, driving over a comforter. It'd be something crazy where they're basically telling you, I don't know what the front tires are doing to what I'm doing on the steering wheel. And Porsche, when they switched to electric steering, was one of the big things that people were either talking about, nervous about, or didn't like because it lost some of that feeling that they say you get with hydraulic system. It is interesting to see McLaren still holding on to that even in something like this, because at this stage, most are going electric for the sake of packaging, lightweight, and argument of the feedback and how fast it can react to what you're doing. So this is still using a hydraulic system for the steering. So I would imagine when people are testing and driving this, we're going to get accolades, or we're going to get a lot of information on steering and how it felt and what it feels like when you're driving it. But back to what I was saying. 0 to 60 time, 2.7 seconds. Now, that isn't the craziest number we've heard. I think a Lucid Sapphire does it in under 2 seconds now. And so we've heard faster numbers, but what that number does tell you, that's indication of the limitation of rear-wheel drive, right? 2.7 is not slow on any stretch of the imagination. I'm not going to split hairs on 2.5 to 2.7. I don't even think anybody's going to be able to tell the difference between a car that does it in 2 seconds and 2.7. It's all rocket ships, okay? But the McLaren W1, interesting enough, you can see that it's spinning tires. But when you get up to the higher speeds, that power starts making itself known. 0 to 124 in 5.8 seconds. That's crazy. 0 to 186 in 12.7 seconds, up to a top speed of 217. So clearly, once we crack 60 and we get into 90, 100, which is really when any of these cars start really showing what they can do, that's when you start seeing the power. That's when you really start getting those numbers trying to trickle down. And when you see them digital gauges where the numbers are spinning so fast, you're like, that got to be a sped up video. And it's like, no, that's real life. Now, 217 miles an hour isn't again, it's not a wild top speed. I mean, I'm not going to say I don't like the headlines of seeing Bugatti saying we did 300 miles an hour, or Koenigsegg saying top speed is 275. It's cool. Reality is, at no point ever are most of them ever going to touch that speed on any road that isn't an Autobahn or some stretch in Nevada or the desert where you just push it and hope that a cop isn't somewhere floating around, ready to take you to jail. So 217 miles an hour. And I know that for some, they'll say that's slow, but the W1 has a goal here. It has a reason why it's made. And it really is track related. And most tracks have a straightaway that you can get up to, fast cars can get up to 200 or so. But none of them are going to just have a stretch of you just going and going until you can crack the top speed, unless it's a top speed oval or some test track like VW has. But anyways, continuing on. The W1 is engineered for the track, as I said. And because of that, they actually set this up to have multiple track modes, right? So there is a mode called Race and Race Plus. So Race and Race Plus is just obviously added into different modes depending on the track. For instance, there's this thing called GP mode, Grand Prix mode, I'm probably assuming. Grand Prix mode, it assumes that you are going to be on the track for a length of time, so it optimizes the power across the board. Everything is set up so that you can have lap after lap. Then there's another option, another mode that is made for maximum attack. I think it's called sprint mode. But what it does is it maximizes the output. I'm just taking the electric motor, the gas motor, everything, and saying this is maximum attack mode. We are now trying to get the fastest lap we can. In conjunction with that, the steering wheel has a boost button, which calls upon the electric motor, the 1.3 kilowatt hour battery, and says, give me all that power. Think of it like the DRS button in Formula One. Then there's an Aero button, which is cool, and we'll get to the Aero in a second. Aero button plays into the active aero in the car. Similar to the GT3 RS has active aero that can play into what you're doing as you're driving. I don't know if this is, because nobody's tested this car now, we're just showing the reveal. I would guess that the active aero could be manipulated in a way when you're driving, or depending on the G-forces or how you're turning or braking. And obviously it has an air brake with a spoiler and things like that, but some of that could play a role into how the car handles and when it decides to reduce the drag, so that when you hit the straightaway, we can gain more speed there, increase the drag, increase the downforce when we get to the corners, so on and so forth. That's my theory on this as well. But one of the cool things that it can do is, in a video, and hopefully I have this video in the clip of you watching me talk on this podcast, but there's a video that was showing the rear wing, kind of come out open, goes into that air brake, maximum downforce. But then it has a mode where it kind of lowers itself down and stretches out like a foot beyond the body. So you have the spoiler goes up, you have the downforce mode, right? More track oriented. Then it kind of falls down a little bit and goes off of the car into a long tail effect. If you remember some of the older F1 cars, there was a long tail version, and I'll throw a picture up here so you can see it. So it's cool to see them pay homage to that, where they're still showing their history, saying, hey, here's the option of aerodynamics where we reduce the drag, still have downforce, but we're paying homage to long tail version of the McLaren, right? So the McLaren F1 long tail. So W1 has that option in this, active aero. There's also a spoiler in the front, and the spoiler in the front can lift up and lift down. And from the video that I saw, obviously at some point in time, it, coincides with the rear diffuser. So if I have it up, more air flowing in, down, less air flowing in. I'm not an aerodynamicist, okay, if that's a position. But looking at the video, you can deduce what this front spoiler is doing. Less drag, more downforce, less downforce. Or do we need it to stick to the ground? Are we trying to get high speed, top speed? Are we trying to take the corners as aggressively as we can? That is what this is for. So they have that mode, and together, active Aero produces 2,200 pounds of downforce. There's no wild wing. I don't even know if maybe they make a W1 GTR. I can't even fathom what that's going to look like. And I can't even imagine what type of downforce that's creating. We're already at 2,200. If you get any more, it can get to that point where they say cars can stick on the ceiling. And that's usually when the downforce is more than how much the car weighs. So there are Formula One cars do that, where there's so much downforce, it's more than the car weighs, where you could say, technically, you can drive it upside down because there's enough downforce to keep the thing stuck to the ground or stuck to the ceiling. So this produces 2,200, pounds of downforce, and I'm assuming that's that maximum track attack mode, full wing up, all diffusers operating, all front spoilers in maximum downforce mode. But the cool thing too is that it also has something similar to like the Ford GT. We've seen the Ford GT where they'll lower it down to track mode where hydraulically will lower the entire car fairly fast, where the W1 has that same thing now. There is a mode that drops the front end when you go into this race or race plus mode. The front end comes down 1.5 inches, the rear 0.7 inches to even further reduce, well, not reduce drag. This is just to basically get it more active and to help the rear diffuser, front spoiler, rear spoiler to be as active as they can to getting this car stuck to the ground and making sure that you can take this rear wheel drive with over 1,200 horsepower and not send yourself into the tires. Okay, that's what we're doing this for. Now, the overall technology in the car when it comes to McLaren and what they do, we know they're at the top when it comes to the stuff they do in Formula One and how it trickles down to their car. This is them taking that technology and sticking it into a road going car. Because even though it is made for the track, even though it is made with that in mind, the W1 is first and foremost a road going car, which in this day and age, when it comes to these crazy hypercars and supercars, road going is a very stretched term, okay? Road going can mean there's AC and you got tires in the steering wheel and you can shut a door. But reality is, are you that comfortable? Though, McLaren has been known for their suspension being incredibly compliant on rough roads, terrible roads, and still being able to, at a moment's notice, switch into a mode that is incredibly worthy of any track, back road, mountain, Angel's Crest, whatever it may be, Tail of the Dragon. It can handle all of that. So I would imagine that's continuing because the P1 was known for having incredible compliance and handling well with their hydraulic suspension and how they ran it and how they produced it and engineered it. 720S is the same way. Arturo is the same way. If you read anything recently about a McLaren and wanted to know how did they feel on the road, it's always been high praise. So in addition to that, we have new doors, right? No longer we get the butterfly doors. We get GullWing doors, similar to like a DeLorean straight up or, Mercedes 300 SL. GullWing doors. No more butterfly. I like the GullWing doors. I think they need to come back more. Everybody has Koenigsegg has the other greatest doors ever, the dihydral doors or however they call it. But everybody has like some butterfly type of door that swings up to the front of it. But, bringing back the GullWing doors, I'm not mad at this. It's glad to see, bring back the doors that, started this all kind of in a way. So GullWing doors, and now we get to the interior. Now, this is a brand new interior. It's nothing. I'm not blown away, right? But I'm not disappointed. And what I mean by that is the interior looks really good. And you could tell it's like molded into the monocoque. Clearly, these seats, as you can see from the picture, these seats are made to the driver. It clearly, you got to go there, get molded into the seat, what you feel. I do like how they do these options, though, because one of them was like black and brown with like this kind of particle effect. It all looks like a fabric. None of it looks like a leather. Well, I'm sure you can add, but they have a bright orange one that matches to their known orange color for their liveries and everything. They have black one, and it all like the one that the orange interior looks like the exterior of the orange one they shown. So the interior looks good. Technology wise, they didn't talk about it, but let's just say the standard. Apple CarPlay, wireless CarPlay, maybe it has Android Auto this time, maybe it doesn't. It probably has option of a very nice sound system for like Burmeister or Bang & Olufsen or somebody like that you can put in the car. And I'm sure MSO and all these people can do whatever you want to your heart's content, because whatever we see for this, the MSO options are still on the board, meaning whatever color you want in this car, you can get it. Like there's no limitation being your bank account, even though this car costs a pretty penny. But even then, at that upper reaches of multimillionaires, you can still get to the point where you're like, oh, this is absolutely absurd now. And you can probably do exposed carbon and all these type of things in the inside, and matte carbon and Alcantara and suede and leather and ostrich and or Hermes bag and stick it inside. Okay, you can do whatever you want. But I do like it. Technology's there. They have like a little floating dash, screen in the front. The steering wheel is very much to the point of the driver. There isn't any fluff. I'll say that. Like, you're not looking at this car and you're like, oh, they just added stuff in there for no reason. It's still very much a driver-focused interior. It's not trying to be a grand tourer. It wasn't trying to, I don't even see where you can stick a bag or anything in the interior. You probably have a little bit of space, maybe in the front, maybe on the side, but they're not building this for you to have a road trip and bring all of your doodads and goods. They're probably like, listen, you can take a backpack and be happy. Okay. Take your backpack, be happy, and move on. So the interior I do like. I like how it looks. And I like how it's set up. I do like how the seats are kind of molded in. I'm sure if I ever had the opportunity to sit inside of one, it's going to feel really incredible because you can see how low it sits and how much your sight line would be out of the car. And now we get to the exterior. Now, I've held on to the exterior because I saw this announcement this morning. They leaked it the day before, as it always happens. And I, like on my Instagram, CarQuicks, if you don't know, go follow. I made a comment saying, I don't know, it's interesting. Let me see the reveal so I can decide how I really feel about this, right? And when the reveal came, I've been looking at this car and I'll say this. Let's just we have it up on the screen. Let me try to formulate my thoughts on how I feel about how this car looks. On one hand, it's incredibly aggressive. If you look at the rear diffuser section, the rear 3/4 from the door, that massive like swooping intake that molds into the body, the side skirt area, I mean, it's aggressive. Like, you're looking at this like, clearly this is made to channel all air and downforce in and out of this engine and around this body. So from that view, it looks crazy. It looks incredibly aggressive. The front part of it, I have a mixed bag. And I'll say that most definitely in person, and depending on the color the person chooses and how they set up their package or MSO, I'm sure in person, the aggression makes it a little more exciting. Though what I will critique is that the aggression now kind of just feels like more function over form, even though McLaren is about function as far as how their cars perform. I just know that we had a nice blend of it on the P1. The P1 looked good, like very good. And it still had aggression and it still had function. Though I don't know if their end goal of what they wanted with the W1 could have been achieved without having this active aero and these massive intakes in the front. Maybe their goal of 1,200 plus horsepower couldn't be reached without having enough radiators in the front. Maybe their goal of 2,200 pounds of downforce couldn't be reached without an active front aero, lip, spoiler that was working in conjunction with the rear diffuser and the active wing. Maybe they couldn't even do any of that without having what they have now and how it looks. So I can understand that. Though there is a running joke online, people saw this car and I thought the exact same thing. There's a hypercar or supercar out there called the Arcan, like hypercar or something. It looks, the front end looks, there's a resemblance there. I'm not saying it looks exactly like it. The other car looks terrible to me. This does not look that bad. But there's some resemblance where I feel like McLaren can start bringing in the designers. And here's another thing. I'll throw them some bail and I'll kind of critique my own opinion. Maybe what I'm thinking for what they should have done on this W1 from design, they already did it when it came to the Speedtail. and maybe what I'm expecting them to do when it comes to how things look, because the Speedtail looks like a spaceship on the ground as far as the smoothness of it. But even when that came out, some of the design language and resemblance of the car when it comes like the headlights to the 720 and the 675 was just too familiar, especially when you go from Senna to Speedtail to 720 and 750s and 675s at that time. It just, the resemblance was too close when you're talking about a spread of car from like, 400,000 to 2 million. It was just like, why do these front ends look so familiar? You can have a family resemblance or a family air, but similar to like Ferrari does, they might have special bespoke cars like the Daytona SP3 or the LaFerrari looks nothing like the new 12-cylinder. It's just like there is some separation between the cars. McLaren has a very common theme, which I think in one way can work if you like that common theme. On one side, I do wish it was just a design just a little bit more like, just that pin was just applied a little bit more to the front end. Looks aggressive though. I'm not going to say it doesn't. I don't know if it's a beautiful design. It's a functional design. I do think that more of the beauty and artistic nature of like supercars being posters, like being something that you would see in movies and on posters and be like, it doesn't have to even move. This looks gorgeous. I think it's going to be exciting when designers get back to designing not for the sole purpose of maximum performance function, but also in conjunction with, I want to have this as a picture. I want to see this as what we used to wrap our books in school, book covers. I want to see this as something that can just stand over in the gallery and be there and you can say, that looks beautiful. I'm not saying that when I see one of these in person, because I'm most certain that somebody in Houston is going to have one of these at some event that I'm going to see it, that I won't be like, all right, this looks crazy, because it still does look crazy. I'm just critiquing certain things on the front end. I will say this, headlights and that like front grille slit right under there. I do like the headlights. I think it is better that they got away from that little boomerang design that they've had on McLarens for a long time. I do like how those headlights look. I think it would look even crazier when they get it onto maybe other cars that kind of basically reduce the busyness of the front end. That's really what this is all about, honestly. I think now my thoughts are getting clear as I'm talking out loud. The front end is just busy. It really all it is just reducing the busyness of the front end. And I think we would have something that's really, really dope. And the reason why I said it might depend on the color is that if somebody, the examples that we have seen have split the color. The top front of that front end is orange, and then the bottom was black on this example I see here. But then there was a all black example. Clearly the all carbon one is always going to look like a Batmobile, Bruce Wayne-ish. But if somebody takes this and goes to MSO and says, I want you to color the entire thing, which is probably what I would do. I would say, hey, I want accents of maybe carbon fiber or black or something inside of there, but I want most of this entire car to be one solid color. I want it to be painted, because that kind of cleans up everything, kind of hides certain things, and kind of brings in that beauty that you maybe do not see when it comes to having everything exposed carbon, which is a thing everybody loves. I can love it. Sometimes it's just too much, but the rear 3/4 is nuts. Like that rear vent on the back where the door is to the diffuser in the rear is crazy, but there is family resemblance, and family resemblance can be good, and I think it can be bad. It's a double-edged sword, really. One hand is great. We can kind of see the lineage. On one hand, it's kind of like, for what this costs, it's kind of better to start getting a little further away, just because they've made the P1 and then they made this one. And this doesn't look like the P1, but it doesn't push beauty, right? I don't know how to explain this unless you see the F1 and the P1 right next to each other. And I'll put them up on the screen so you can kind of see where we were at with the F1, the P1, and now the W1. Obviously, the W1 is incredibly more aggressive, way more capable. I'm sure when they go on the Nürburgring, they're going to smash whatever record the P1 had. But still, it looks good. That's just critiques. I mean, we're talking about, and I didn't get the price yet, a $2.1 million car. So if you got 2.1 million greenbacks laying around burning a hole in your pocket, it's too late, because all 399 examples have been spoken for. Somehow before we even saw it, which ain't somehow. If you know how these supercars and hypercars operate, when these cars are being developed many years back, we might have seen it 10 years after the debut of the P1, but the P1 was being developed probably 5 to 7 years before we saw it in 2013. And this most definitely was being developed probably 5 years back, and they already called on them owners of the P1 or who got LaFerraris or any other hypercar or who's on YouTube with a massive car collection, called them up and said, hey, we got the successor to the P1 coming out. Would you like to be on the list? If I had the funds, nobody's saying no, because it's an easy go. Because even if you hated the car, if you get it, you're like, I don't really like how it looks. It's incredibly fast and capable, but I have nowhere to go. I like driving my cars on the street, and this is just too much car. You can flip this thing for the cool $3 million or $4 million when it comes out. So there's no lose-lose on this. This is going to go to those owners. Some are going to drive it. Some are going to park it in their collection and stare at it. And that's going to be that. But that is a W1. I think it's exciting. It also, I didn't talk about this part of it, but if you didn't know, if you had to know, I know I talked about the engine and all this stuff before, but I just realized that I mentioned this. It's an 8-speed dual clutch transmission. I don't even think I need to tell you that. If you were looking at this car and thought that there was a manual transmission anywhere, I have some, beachfront property to sell you in the middle of El Paso. So the car looks awesome. Even though I critiqued the front end, I still think it looks dope. Doesn't mean it looks bad. To me, it just means that, hey, if I was to critique something and say, what would I improve or change? It would be like that dude that has that YouTube channel. I don't know if you ever seen it, but there's a guy that has a YouTube channel that takes cars and shows what he would change and tweak the design. And usually when he is done, especially the new 3D render artists that are on Instagram, they're going to probably take this and add something to it. And everybody's going to be like, that's what it should have looked like. But like I said, their end goal of performance and downforce and what they wanted to achieve may have led them to this design. So that is all I have for you, okay? I just wanted to talk about this car, give you a quick update, see what you think about it. Give me your comments, your likes, your dislikes. I'm going to throw some shorts up there about what this car looks like. I think it's cool, exciting. I can't wait to see what Ferrari has coming next. Ferrari's working on the successor to the LaFerrari. He's been running around in camouflage somewhere in Italy. I'm sure Porsche's somewhere in the drawing board thinking about what they're going to do next. So exciting times. Corvettes out there dropping 1,064 into ZR1s. They got the Zora coming out with, they said, another 1,200. Listen, if you have upwards of $200,000 to spend on a car, this is a glorious time. I kind of feel like some of these manufacturers are doing this too, because we have all these new EPA cafe rules, places like California saying in 2037 we're not going to have gas power cars sold anymore in America, or whatever state or whatever country is trying to basically just tighten down everything so that they can capitalize on another market, right? Without getting into the weeds, there's also money to be made, so everybody has to make money. So there ain't no way that they're producing or introducing electric cars under the guise of like, yeah, we're trying to make them cheaper. So anyways, this is a cool time. W1, the McLaren. There's going to be plenty of videos on YouTube about this car, especially people that got to go see one in person. I'm looking for those videos. No, I was not invited. Somehow, some way, they didn't know CarQuicks is out here doing videos and podcasts, and they should have called me. Now, I'll see y'all around. As I always say, before and after, do as you wish and do as you may. The GR Corolla is doing well. There are more updates coming later, but not now. Soon enough. I'll see y'all around. Peace.